Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pathfinder presented by Payload, the leading digital media company in the space industry. I'm your host Mo Islam, and today we're joined by Mark Kugel, the co-CEO and co-founder of Yuri, a German-based space biotech firm that specializes in synthetic biology and conducts drug discovery in space. More on that in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors.
SpiderOak's Orbit Secure software is designed for hybrid space operators struggling to manage the chaos of securing data flow and access to and from tens of thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit. Using a unique combination of end-to-end zero-trust encryption and blockchain distributed ledger, Orbit Secure allows your mission to orchestrate and secure Earth-to-orbit, orbit-to-Earth transmission, communication, and storage of sensitive data across even the most complex and unsecure hybrid space environments. To learn how Orbit Secure can bring zero-trust security and resiliency to your zero-gravity environments, check out SpiderOak at www.spideroak.com. Mark, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you.
Hey Mo, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You know, I think you might actually be, I think Yuri might be the first company that's European-based that we've had on the show.
Awesome.
Which is not that's a failure on our part. We need to do more. We need to do better about that. But very excited from that regard as well. So anyway, let's jump right into it. So tell us a little bit about Yuri. What is it that you're building? What does the company do?
Sure. Yeah. So Yuri is a biotech company that harnesses the uniqueness of space to develop unearthly bioproducts, as we call them. Before maybe going into what we're building, I often start with what we're not building. So we don't build rockets, we don't build spacecraft, none of the kind of expensive infrastructure that might explode. We don't think we have to reinvent the wheel on that because there's a lot of amazing and a lot of companies actually working on both already, and many of them were in your podcast, obviously. What we're building is the life science technology inside those spacecraft. So that mostly includes three elements: the incubation system to right alien conditions, the sophisticated bioreactors for high throughput sample processing in space, and then the actual piece of biology that we're growing or manufacturing there and that we're selling to industries on Earth.
Well, there's a lot that we're going to unpack there for sure. So I do want to know though, how did you get into this? What inspired you to work on this project and company?
Yeah, so my co-founders, Maria and Chris, they were like hardcore space engineers for like 10 plus years. And they worked on more than 10 life science payloads that were launched to the International Space Station for like NASA projects, European Space Agency projects, the typical, cost plus old space missions, I would say, while they were working at the large aerospace firm Airbus in Europe. And while they were excited about building the tech, they've always been quite critical about these, cost plus contracts that incentivize everyone to keep costs high, to keep innovation low. And we actually randomly met at a founders event. I've always been, super excited about space. I had a couple of startups before, and they had tons of ideas on how to make the tech more powerful, more reusable, and how painful it is to just convince a large corporate to invest in such, innovative projects. And after a conversation, I was so excited and that I basically lost myself like 2 or 3 weeks reading everything I could about ISS research the past 20 years. And I think I had two major insights on like getting into that. One is that the initial space research, when we started it as humanity, like in the 60s and also 70s and beyond, it was all about, the research was all about the negative aspects of space on biological systems. So how do we survive on a trip to Mars, right? How could we grow food in space that's, could feed us and it's not kind of, not growing. So it's really about the negative aspects and how can we mitigate them. And while now, if you look at the last 10 or so years, the focus shifted towards understanding the potentially valuable effects that space has in industries on Earth. So people ask the question, well, what if I leave gravity out of the equation? What does it mean for the growth of crystals, of tissues, of whole organisms? Is there some good here that we can use also on Earth? That was one insight. It turns out there's a whole world that's suddenly possible without that gravity part of it and also other space effects. And the second insight I had is really, it's not science fiction anymore. We had more than 2,000 studies in the life sciences just on the ISS with an incredible amount of data of backing up what I just said, or we will probably cover in this conversation. So it's not like we're just doing basic research. We just started. We had the first space station last year, and now we were just learning. We actually learned 20 plus years already. And also that, many of the barriers that have hindered us to exploit this commercially have come down very quickly in the last years. And better than myself, having interviewed all of the players doing that. Launches are more affordable, more reliable, happening much more frequently. I actually was staying at the Cape this March for a month, and there were on average 2 to 3 rocket launches every week being there. It's just like so amazing to see people at the beach. Oh yeah, there's another rocket. I just forgot about that. It's become so common. And also beyond the ISS, there's, to our knowledge, more than 20 companies now building spacecraft and building like commercial infrastructure there. So that was really for me that struck me. Hey, this is like, in terms of timing, in terms of like potential, this is huge. This is super exciting. So came back to them. Hey, let's start a company. Let's quit our jobs.
Yeah.
And that did that end of 2019, and that's how we get all started.
So let's just dig into some of the history a little bit for a second, which you're alluding to. So manufacturing in space, using microgravity environments to do any type of scientific work or manufacturing work isn't that new, right? Like you said, we've conducted thousands of experiments on the ISS. To my knowledge, we have done some type of biomanufacturing in space for some time. Can we just dig in for a second a little bit more into like, why is this an area of such focus now? Is it really just because the cost of access to space has come down? And it could be as simple as that. Or is there more of a desire from big pharma companies and companies here on Earth that are trying to innovate and figure out faster, better, cheaper ways for even something as important as, I don't know, drug discovery?
Yeah, I think you gave some of the reasons already. Maybe to take one step back on the manufacturing side, because I think people sometimes understand different things in like manufacturing space. I think one side of thing is that, space for space, where an astronaut needs a spare part on a hardware piece and he has a 3D printer, or she has a 3D printer to just, replicate that. Or let's say you have a satellite that kind of manufactures itself in space. That's been around for a couple of years. I think, a company called Made in Space, which, by the way, I think is like the coolest company name ever. They've done that 2014 already, right? So almost 10 years ago, we had the first 3D printer on the ISS. And the second kind of area, and this is probably what your question is aiming towards, is using the unique environment of space to manufacture things that are either impossible or very hard to do on Earth, with the goal of manufacturing that in space for Earth. And this is also something we've been doing for a couple of years already, and maybe not as long as the other part. Again, another Redwire company, because Made in Space was acquired by Redwire, and also a company called TechShot. They actually had the first 3D bioprinter on the ISS in 2019. So fairly recently, so basically in the year we were founded with the goal of printing human tissue without artificial scaffolds. And then there's been quite a few more efforts. So from fiber optic cables, from new metals. Then, of course, we just talked about Varda, who have their capsule in space right now, that focus very much on reformulation and like the drug manufacturing process. So yes, there have been some use cases. I think, to answer your question on the reason, it's a mix of a couple of factors. Some of them you've already mentioned. So one, really definitely the cost curve, just basically the industrial parks, as everyone says, are being built up right now. The ISS was very research focused. I mean, we've went through the NASA process many times now, and just, it's super important, but it's also very painful if you're a commercial company to do like commercial processes with those safety processes. And that's why we're just having finally, hopefully very soon, the commercial infrastructure to do all of the things we should do in a scalable way. So far, it's mostly been just pilot projects.
Right. Well, so at a fundamental level, right, why does space allow for more interesting, exciting, more significant commercial outcomes within sort of within biotech?
Yeah,
what does microgravity enable? What does microgravity enable?
Yeah,
and I think you mentioned one of them, right? We don't need artificial
factor.
Scaffolding, right? You mentioned artificial scaffolding for organ development, which makes sense. But what else? Like, that's one thing that I think most folks, I think from conversations I've had in the past, like have a hard time kind of wrapping their head around.
Yeah, and makes total sense. I mean, it's not an environment you come across every day. I mean, I think most people, since childhood or since high school days probably know, if you're in orbit, there's no, gravity, or you have microgravity. There's a little bit of radiation that's higher on Earth, and then a couple more. There's a vacuum. It's very cold out there. But I think the most important, interesting factor that we really have a hard time to replicate on Earth is the gravity part of things. And just think of it as another physical parameter that we now have the ability to just switch it off completely or to lower it in certain ways. And that is quite interesting on a lot of physical levels because it changes the structure, the growth, the ability to manufacture things. I'm happy to give a couple of examples. We're mostly focused on life science, so maybe start with that, but there's also other areas. I mentioned scaffolding already. So let's say you want to 3D print a human heart. If you try to do that on Earth, if you try to, layer by layer, try to print cells on top of each other, at some point, and mostly that's around 1 centimeter, no idea what that's in inches, I'm European, but around 1 centimeter, it kind of collapses under the weight of gravity, right? Let's say you have a jellyfish, you take it out of the water, they're very flat. And it's similar to cell culture, any tissue that you try to grow on Earth. So you need artificial scaffolds to keep it in place. Well, if you don't have gravity, you can, go on for this forever and just grow as large structures as you want, layer by layer, printing human tissue, printing any type of wobbly material. So that is interesting if you grow organoids to do drug testing, but maybe 5 to 10 years down the road, it might be interesting to grow that heart in space without scaffolds and implant it to a human being on Earth. How cool would that be? So the whole tissue engineering field is something super exciting. And the other thing, and this is partly where Varda also goes in, and also we have done some experiments before, is the crystal growth part of things. So if you grow a crystal on Earth, and kind of the single molecules come together to grow that crystal, on Earth you have two effects, which is convection and sedimentation. And convection means, hot air rises to the top, and sedimentation means you have sand in the water, it just, falls to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And the problem with these effects is, and they're all based on gravity, is that during the growth process of a crystal, you have defects in the crystal, and also it hinders really the kind of size of the crystal in terms of growth. And the crystals are also not as uniform as you want them because of gravity. And that is something that is, a lot of science backing on the ISS so far, that you can grow on average larger, more higher quality crystals with less defects and also more uniform. And that has two implications in the life science or in the drug discovery process. One, on the very first part of the drug discovery process, let's say you want to understand a protein that's responsible for a disease. The way to develop a drug is to really understand the surface structure of the protein. And to understand the surface structure, because it's so tiny, you cannot just look at it with a microscope. You have to grow it in a crystal, and then it's kind of an indirect process. You shoot an X-ray beam at that crystal, and from the pattern you see on the other side, you can then, calculate the surface structure of that protein. And as you can imagine, the better your crystal quality, the better the image of the surface structure of the protein. Right. So what we've done in space is we found better crystals of the same protein. We brought them down to Earth, and we found a better image of that protein that we couldn't find with crystals grown on Earth. So that's the very first part of the drug discovery process, understanding that first piece of the puzzle and then developing a better, we call it asset, let's say like a better inhibitor against that drug. And in this case, it would really be just taking space as a trigger. There's one example where, something happens, something magical happens in space, you take it down on Earth, and then the rest happens on Earth. On the very last part, or one of the last steps in a pharma process, and this is where manufacturing comes in, is in actually the formulation of the drug once you deliver it into the body. There's also where crystallization plays a large part, because if it's not as uniform as you want it, you might have morphologies that are not ideal. And so there have been drugs in the past that have been taken from the market because they crystallized in weird ways that weren't anticipated before. And the hope now of the space industry is that we can grow those crystals reliably in more uniform structures, that we can improve a drug's administration. Most prominent case of that is Keytruda from Merck. I think just recently said it's like a $6 billion a quarter drug. Like almost half of the revenue of Merck is Keytruda,
Yep.
A cancer drug. And Paul Reichert, which also had several conversations, like super inspiring person, had, I think, more than 20 experiments in space so far. And he discovered very interesting new uniform morphologies in space for Keytruda. And the hope is today Keytruda is pretty difficult to administer, I think, through like an infusion or so. I'm not 100% sure. But let's say you change that morphology, that it could just be, through a shot or just through an injection. That would drastically improve just the benefit or the value of that drug, and to make it much easier to administer. So that is kind of the two things with crystallization. That's why I took so much time to explain that.
No, it's fascinating.
It's important to differentiate, right? The one is like having the insights in space. The other one is manufacturing in space.
No, absolutely. So I recall you once saying that we've actually developed and grown bacteria in space that look nothing like bacteria that we've seen on Earth. In a way that it's evolved and adapted to microgravity environments. Can you talk about that for a second and what that means, or why that excites you?
Yeah, that actually excites us the most right now, because it's this where our biggest, our strongest focus is right now. One analogy would be, let's take the PCR that we all know from COVID. We had to do these, horrible tests with our nose and mouth. The enzyme inside this PCR process was actually not developed in a lab. It was found in Yellowstone Park in 1976. And so what seems like a kind of exception in biotech where, we found something randomly and now this is super valuable because it is like super thermostable, is actually quite a common thing. So a lot of the workhorses of biology, of biotech industries today, they were not developed in a lab. They were found in the harshest environments of nature, because in these environments, the organisms are forced to adapt in very unique ways. They have two choices, either to die or to change their genome and kind of their morphology fast enough to adapt to this unique environment. And in this process, they often develop very unique features. Like in the Yellowstone example, they're very thermostable, or some bacteria, develop certain, mobility features that they can move around or so. Like there's really fascinating things that those, we call it extremophiles, develop. And we thought, okay, what could be extremer than going to space in terms of environment? There's nothing harsher than being there. And turns out our CSO, Daniela, she has a couple of, studies on microbes on the ISS, and they found sometimes, more than 50% of the genome changing, and, to a point where you wouldn't, realize that is the same bacteria, the same organism. And also there, they found incredibly interesting adaptations that could be super valuable for the whole, hype buzzword synthetic biology industries on Earth.
Sure.
That all need better, microbes, better yeast, better bacteria that have higher yield, better thermostability, and so on. And that kickstarted the idea on our side, hey, let's focus on that, because unless the really reliable high frequency space infrastructure is there, we cannot really on a large scale do manufacturing space. And that's where we at Yuri are super focused on using space as a trigger first, to build our commercial use cases, and using adaptation processes of microbes in space, bring them down, do the rest of the value creation on Earth. For us, fits the bill perfectly.
So we'll get back to that Synbio point you made, but I do want to talk. I just want to put my investor hat on for a second. What is the size of this market, right? How do you think about sizing the market today? Basically, any type of because for the most part, a lot of this is experimentation, kind of discovery. You obviously might have certain hypotheses around what will occur if you put a certain type of biology up in space. But a lot of this is companies trying to take swings at different hypotheses that they have and see what comes out of it, and potentially the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar drug right down the line. But how do you think about sizing this market today, and what you think it grows to, or it looks like in, call it, a decade?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's probably besides the space engineering, one of the hardest parts that we have tried to wrap our heads around the last years, because it's not an existing market, right? There's no market for like space-derived bioproducts. There is a market for like life science research in space, but that's tiny. It's like government funded. I think it's around 150 million a year, of like NASA, ESA, like German Space Agency budgets if you combine them. So that's nice for us. We make some 7-figure revenues on that. but that's not the market we're looking at. How we see it is just, can you solve a really hard problem that is just incredibly valuable if you unlock that, if you have solved it. And then naturally, we come from the life science because the hardware that Marie and Chris developed at Airbus were like purely life science focused, and just happens to be that, life science pharma is also the biggest markets on that, and also with the most challenging problems. And if you look at the R&D spending, they've always gone up per drug every year in pharma because, first of all, it's harder to find new interesting targets, but it's also just the whole regulation, all the processes just have become so complex that we actually became less efficient rather than more efficient on the whole biopharma side. So everyone is desperately looking for any innovative way to be faster, cheaper, new approaches, to have, new modalities and so on. So that was in general a great industry to start. In addition, on like the overall biology market, what we're super excited about this whole Synbio part of things is that basically the whole physical world as we know it today will probably be replaced by using biological process in the next 20, 30 years. Because yes, we have clean energy and so on, but to get rid of all the physical, plastics and everything we have today, which is all petroleum based, we need to have biology to replace those non-sustainable processes. And just quoting a random McKinsey number here, but they say in theory, 60% of the physical products today could be replaced using biology. And that's about a 4 trillion a year, opportunity in general, like going super top down, right? And then it comes, of course, bottom up. You have to then see, okay, what are the actual use cases and what are the actual kind of deal sizes? And then we looked at, okay, what are the players in synthetic biology? Like, how does this market work in terms of protein engineering and like gene editing and so on? And turns out if you either improve or find new microbes or proteins that act as biocatalysts in a very valuable process, that could be a super interesting market opportunity. Just giving some examples. So Ginkgo had a deal with Merck, for example, where they sold 4 proteins for like a total deal value of $140 million, right? So like 4 proteins, $140 million. So those tiny, tiny particles, if they serve a very unique, important process in a large industry, they can have a huge, huge leverage on the bottom line of those companies, which also makes what you build very valuable because you help them do that. And then the types of deals are very similar to typical pharma deals where you have an upfront payment, you have a milestone-based payment based on like the science progress you make. And then ideally, you have a very large royalty part of that where, once that product hits the market, you get like a certain percentage on the drug sales or on the whatever product you want to create sales.
Yeah, and I think just for the benefit of the audience, Ginkgo, the company you mentioned, Ginkgo Bioworks, is a publicly traded company that focuses on Synbio. Recently, I think a year ago or so, acquired another one, Zymergen, in the space.
Correct.
So there's been a lot of public M&A activity in the space too. So for those interested, it's very easy to go and check out sort of the business models of some of these companies. But Mark, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. And we're going to actually talk about Yuri because we haven't spent nearly enough time on that yet. So stay with us. Space is the new frontier for cybersecurity. To quote the commander of the U.S. Space Force's Operations Command, cyber threats are unfortunately the soft underbelly of our global space networks. SpiderOak, the leader in space cybersecurity software, is dedicated to providing space operators with the solutions they need to protect hybrid space systems. Their Orbit Secure software uses a unique combination of end-to-end zero-trust encryption and blockchain distributed ledger, allowing missions to orchestrate and secure Earth-to-orbit, orbit-to-Earth transmission, communication, and storage of sensitive data across even the most complex and unsecure LEO and hybrid space systems. To learn how Orbit Secure can bring zero-trust security and resiliency to your zero-gravity environments, check out SpiderOak at www.spideroak.com. So let's talk about Yuri, right? So what is the core product that you're building? What's the core product offering? What are the types of technologies that you're building for the industry?
Sure. Yeah, we think of it like the initial vision when we started was to make life science research as easy, automated, comfortable in space as it is on Earth today. So we have, today on Earth, we have microscopes, we have like screening chips, we have multi-well plates, and we have all kinds of fancy bioreactors and microfluidic systems and everything you can imagine to create the amazing products we have today, including vaccines and drugs and everything. And we just thought that today everything is very manual in space, everything is very clunky and old, which is okay for the basic research that has been done so far. But we said our first task is to modernize the technology stack we have in terms of life science and space. And just coming back to my initial introduction, what does that mean? Obviously, it means kind of the capsule, which other people are solving. We're building everything inside the capsule. And what you need as a first step is the ambient conditions. Let's say you want to grow human cell cultures. You need 37 degrees Celsius. Again, I have no idea what that's in Fahrenheit, but that's the temperature where humans are like comfortable living.
We'll add a conversion link on the show notes.
Yeah. So you have ambient temperature, you have CO2, whatever gas you need, and that is the first step. And you typically do that on Earth in an incubator. Think of it as like a large microwave that just keeps the temperature and like the conditions. That's one thing. Today we have that on the ISS already, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel on that. But all the new capsules and stations and everything that's coming up don't have that. And that's why, fingers crossed, next year we'll have the world's first incubation system for like complex organisms. And that's not on the ISS, but it will be on another spacecraft in space. That's there for researchers to do ISS ready research, but not on the ISS. So that's the big first step that you need. You need these ambient conditions in the incubator. The second step is on a bioreactor level. So bioreactors are inside the incubator, and bioreactors serve a variety of purposes. It could be a bioreactor that keeps, again, human cells alive. You need a media exchange because human cells need nutrients, constantly. And they have they just have things that they don't need anymore. So you have like a cycle. So you need a pump system. You need a microfluidic system. So this is where it gets tiny and where, it's quite a complex piece of hardware because it has to be space rated and bio rated. That's quite if you take a Venn diagram, the overlap is quite low. This is, I think, where.
So at a simple level, so bioreactors are effectively just a device where biological reactions or processes are carried out, right?
Correct.
At the simplistic level. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So we have incubation system, bioreactors. Then we have the analysis tools, so all types of microscopes, collecting data from the samples, and having the comms infrastructure to send that back to Earth in almost real time. So this is the stack that we have been building and are improving. The first level of innovation that we have brought in when we started was to make it modular and reusable. And sounds super simple today, but also when SpaceX started out to do rocket reusable, it was a big revolution. In our case, it was really still these old contracts. Here you have $1 million. Please develop me this one piece of hardware. And then next year, please develop me a slightly different one. You also get $1 million. And we said, this is, not efficient. We're not moving fast enough. And that's why we developed a modular system where you can flexibly combine those bioreactors. And this way already made the cost and the time to launch them into space by about 10 times cheaper and faster. The next level we're working on right now, which will be launched on the maiden launch next year, is on a component level, a modularity, which in theory now allows us to have more than 2 billion permutations of the bioreactors we offer today. And that's quite significant. And most of the components are 3D printed as well, right? So it's much faster and with a much larger variety of doing any type of life science experiment or manufacturing use case with the hardware we're building, hardware, software, electronics, if you want.
So the bioreactors and kind of incubation systems that you're building, are they compatible with any type of spacecraft, or how are you thinking about the actual device itself and who you can work with and partner with?
Yeah, so since day one, we've always designed our technology to be maximum compatible to anything that will be built and has been built. So when we started out doing those experiments on the ISS, we designed our bioreactors to be compatible with basically all of the facilities we have on the ISS today. So we had launches with Space Tango, with Biosurf, with Lamont Aerospace, so a couple of, or Ice Cubes or Kaiser Italia on the European side. So we are very compatible to the ISS today. And now in the next step on the kind of incubation level, we designed our, what we call science taxi, which is the incubator, on a mid-deck locker size form factor. That's a form factor that has been around since space shuttle times. And we almost know any new commercial spacecraft that does not work on that form factor. So, right. a Blue Origin, a Sierra Space, a Axiom. So a lot of those, they also have mid-deck locker size racks inside there. And so we can just plug and play that in. And you can take double the size or 3 or 4 times the size. So it's very, very versatile.
So let's just talk business model for a second, right? So you effectively build the hardware, the science labs, right, yourself, and then you effectively offer those that ability to customers, right? And customers pay you for that service, right? And then So is that sort of is that, am I describing it the right way? Is that sort of the core way that Yuri makes money?
That's the business model today. We call it lab as a service in space. And so we do the end-to-end logistics from you have an idea, you want to send something to space to it's now back at your lab. We built the tech stack, but also organize the whole logistics, with NASA and SpaceX and so on. And now the second part of the business is what I touch upon a bit on the Synbio side already, is now while we have those rocket launches, we also have spare capacities in our bioreactors, which we now can piggyback our own science on top of that. So for very little additional cost, we can build our own research and product development pipeline. And once that comes back, that might be a novel protein or a new compound. We then license that out. We manufacture it in large scale on Earth and then sell it as a product sales. So business model today is a service, fee for service business. Business model from now on will be like royalties and product sales.
So in effect, it sounds like that, when you send up a customer's science payload to space, you're also bringing up your own experiments yourself.
Correct.
So let's talk about the team then. So it sounds like you have some scientists on your team.
Yes. So to be honest,
so what is the team construction? How many folks are focusing on the engineering side of the actual hardware, and how many folks are actually working on the science side of things, to the extent you can share?
Sure. Yeah. So we started out as a pure kind of space engineering service company, always with the customers being life science customers, but the team was purely space engineers. So it was kind of funny when we raised our first seed round after bootstrapping for 2 years, saying, "Hey, we're a bunch of space nerds. We want to build a biotech company. Do you want to give us money, to hire some scientists to do our own bio research?" Right? That was, in short, the pitch. And we were very fortunate to find probably one of the best investors in the world to believe in that vision and also can execute that vision, like 50 years in San Francisco, who are very strong both on the bio and on the space side, but many others around the world. And this is what we did. So we hired an amazing chief scientific officer, Daniela. She basically ran the Chris Mason's lab at Weill Cornell in New York for a couple of years. And Chris Mason is probably one of the most important figures in the space bio research community. And she has, I think, more than 40 papers in Cell Science Nature, many of them in space biology. But she also has a couple of startups. So she co-founded Meta before it was sold to Facebook. She didn't co-found Meta. She co-founded a company with the Meta co-founders, which was basically a pathogen surveillance for COVID. And a couple more startups. So she also has a very commercial angle, being a scientist, which was good. And she also was almost an astronaut. So while we tried to hire her, she was in the last 1,000 candidates out of 26,000 of the European Space Agency astronaut selection. So they're the top 3%. And luckily she dropped out, so we were able to hire her. And she now leads our scientific efforts, having understood what is possible in space, but also having built commercial companies before. It's the perfect match for us to now go on with her and the team. And we, to our knowledge, are the first, space company that have their own biotech lab on Earth, not only in space. So we have a lab now in Barcelona, which is a great ecosystem for that, which is one of the best biotech labs in Europe. We have 5 people there now who take the samples, our own samples from space, and analyze them, screen them, make products out of them. Take a step back to your question. So most of the team is still space engineers today. So we're about 35 people. Many of them are typical, systems engineer, AIT engineers that just know how to develop space hardware, software, electronics. We have some electronics folks. We have some software folks. Many of them are hardware because, we're very hardware focused. So I would say 20 on the space side, and now around 10 on the bio side, if you want to have very rough distribution.
Right. So yeah, we've spent quite a bit of time on the lab side. I do want to talk about the Synbio side. I know we threw out that word a few different times, and I've actually done in my previous life done some work on the Synbio industry through sort of some of the companies that we talked about earlier. So I do want to just kind of start off with just quick sort of like basic explainer, right? So from my perspective, Synbio, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? I'm gonna do the layman definition, then you're gonna make it sound smart. So you're effectively treating cells like think of them almost like little machines or computers. In this case, like microbes, right? So, and in synthetic biology, you're effectively providing, like, for lack of a better word, sort of the programming code for these cells to actually go and do very specific jobs. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with maybe pharma use cases. There can be industrial use cases, right? Because I think the main process that's utilized here is fermentation. So maybe talk a little bit about, because I do want the audience to understand that this is not just like, synthetic biology isn't just like, hey, we're doing something for, like for human, for health use, right? You can also develop things for industrial use cases. And why is it, why is that market so big? There's companies on Earth obviously very much focused on Synbio, but maybe talk a little bit about that from the context of space.
Sure. Yeah. I think I always, being a German, of course, I compared to the beer brewing process. In the end, we take the beer brewing process for everything. So how does beer brewing work in very simple forms? You take sugar from grapes or from some other feedstock, and you convert it into alcohol. And who converts that in the beer brewing process? It's yeast. So it's an organism that can transform some kind of molecule and transform that into some new molecule based on the input that it got. And that's basically the process that a lot of these Synbio companies in the whole industry is using today to develop either existing products we have today in novel, more sustainable ways, or develop completely new products we weren't able to do before. A couple of examples that are extremely exciting. One of them is a company in Houston that is called Soligen, also backed by 50 years, one of our investors. And they take a feedstock, I think it's corn, and they have an enzymatic process. So they have also biocatalysts, or they work with enzymes, and it's a huge, huge factory. And they, I think their first product, what they have is like hydrogen peroxide. So it's a commodity product that's sold today on the market, but they make that in a more efficient and a more sustainable way. So it's basically a carbon positive, or like a climate positive, if that's the correct word, a climate positive process, but they produce a commodity for a better price than it is today with software-like margins, right? So that's like every VC stream, to have like, a huge commodity someone buys today, and you can just have a process that's cheaper and it's still sustainable. And that's synthetic biology, right? So they engineered the enzymes, so they engineered that process, the biology part of it, to make that possible. And there's tons of examples. There's a company in Berlin that does cheese without the cow. So it's not like, soy cheese or anything. It's real cheese with the real, milk protein, but precision fermented, right? And that's the incredible potential that you see here, that you have so many of the commodities of the world today that are produced in very unsustainable or very expensive ways, or commodities we couldn't even dream of today are now suddenly possible through precision fermentation, through those using microbes to convert one product into another.
Right. Can we actually talk for a second about, okay, so you do these processes in space and you discover a novel, maybe like commodity, like just using your example for example, or novel process to create create something for some type of industrial use case. Can we talk about scaling? Like, in my mind, like, to produce, like, how do you think of sort of the next step? Like, okay, you've discovered something that is very valuable, could be very interesting, exciting for use on Earth. Are you now producing this at scale on space, or have you created something that can be replicable in a way that then can be scaled on Earth? How do you think about that?
Right now, all the samples and let's say the organisms we bring back from space, and we call them bactalians, because some of them technically really you can count as aliens because of more than 50% of the genome changed. We only screen them once they're back on Earth. So by definition, we only screen the ones that survive the trip back from space and that work on Earth, right? So yes, we can use them then for scale-up processes on Earth. The interesting thing, and we have not started that yet, but that's always something, that gives me goosebumps. What about the rest? What about the microbes that change in space that somehow, don't survive on Earth? In the next step, could we screen them in space? And if they're valuable and it's worth producing that compound, could we build the infrastructure for manufacturing for them in space? Because it's not possible on Earth. But right now, we're only focusing on the survivors that come back.
Yep.
And they don't change, right? Once the genome changed, it remains like that on Earth. That's what I meant by triggering. It's not like triggering in space and it comes back and it's the same as it was on Earth. No, it's changed infinitely. Yeah.
Right. So you've triggered it in space. You've brought a bactalian, to use your terminology, back to Earth, and then you replicate it here on Earth.
Correct.
Effectively. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, I know my simplistic view of all this is probably you're just like, no, you can't say it that way.
To be honest, I'm not a biologist by training myself, so probably half of the buzzwords I use incorrectly. So I think we're on the same.
We're on the same page. Can we talk a little bit about milestones? Just like to the extent that you can share, like some of the things that the company have done so far, has reached so far. How many space labs have you launched? How many customers? That sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So our team has launched more than 150 of our space labs. So that we call a space lab is like a single bioreactor that we launch on 4 rocket launches so far. We now have 58 customers on like 4 continents in 22 countries. So we're quite global in terms of the customer group we have. What else? We also do microgravity simulation on Earth. So we have part of our business is selling random positioning machines and clinostats, which are devices for your lab that turn in weird ways that simulate the effects of microgravity in some way. So we're selling that very, very well. And the good thing for that is that scientists that buy this machine are very likely then to want to go on a space mission as a next step with us. So yeah, right. I think in terms of like numbers, that's important things. And that's all lab as a service, right? And now we brought more than 8,000 microbial strains back from space. The IP is like all on our side. And this is really the mode we're building up right now. So we're building basically the world's largest microbial genome database based on space perturbations or space adaptations.
Who do you consider to be competitors in the space, or competimates, however you want to describe it?
Love the word competimates. I just know the word frenemies, but
frenemies.
I think for all the space players, we're all in the same boat trying to build that industry together. So far, it's always been that 150 million government pie that everyone's fought against to get this year a bit more than the others, and that's not a fun industry to be in. We're much more trying to create a new pie with everyone together. That's why I think most of the competimates, as you say, are in the space industry. And we're mostly competing on kind of really if you look at a bigger picture with like the, petrochemical industry that still make those unsustainable processes. So within the Synbio community, we're helping everyone being faster, getting processes done quicker and more efficiently. But of course, with the ones that also create new proteins, that create new compounds, we're competing with a lot of companies on Earth now, right? That have also very smart, very innovative processes or products. Not in space, but based on Earth, and that is, I think, long term what we have what we have to compete with is just someone outsmarts us with a process they have found on Earth that is way more efficient what we do in space.
Talk a little bit about the ecosystem in Europe for what you're building. Why is Germany, the right place to be building a company like yours?
Like in general, I do think still today that if you want to build a space company, it's better to be in the US, mostly because of the funding and the large amount of crazy people who believe in your vision and just say, hey, that is so cool. And what if you could do this? Well, in Germany, people very often find 3 reasons why this is a very bad idea and you shouldn't do it. So it's both the funding and the mindset. Not so much and not at all on the engineering side, I would say. We have brilliant engineers, we have brilliant scientists here in Europe, also in Germany. It's really it all comes down to funding and mindset. That being said, we do have some very exciting companies also in our space that have been built up over recent years on the whole value chain, right? We have 3 launch companies in Germany. I think one of the most promising one is ESA Aerospace, also backed by one of the early SpaceX engineers, Bülent Altan. They've raised, I'm not sure, 340 million so far. They're on a very good track. Then on the capsule re-entry vehicle side, we have the exploration company you might know that also built orbital vehicles. And now recently we have Atmos, which we're personally most excited about because they have a very unique technical way of doing re-entry, potentially much cheaper and much more robust than what humanity has done since the 60s. So check them out, Atmos. We're also on their maiden launch, hopefully. So there's some cool tech coming out. I still say the funding, with a lot of European startups, will be the challenge. The hiring and kind of there's no lack of good engineers and also good visions on the founder side.
So the commercial use case for what you're building is very clear, right? Huge market, big market, a lot of end use cases here on Earth. What is the government a customer here? Is that something that you've looked into? And if so, what does that look like?
To be honest, on the Space Lab Service, the government is still the biggest customer for all of us in that industry.
I see.
Right? It's NASA, it's the European Space Agency. Luckily, it's the German Space Agency who still funds a lot of basic research in LEO. The Luxembourg Space Agency, just to mention them, to a very, very strong part, being a tiny country, but they do amazing things in space. They focus their whole industry of the whole country on space right now. So they're laser focused on building companies there. But yes, government still plays an important role. We of course wanted to, on a percentage wise, play a very, very tiny role in the future because we grow in those commercial use cases.
So what does Yuri look like in 10 to 20 years? If you were to, if you could share some of the vision, I know you can't give away all the secret sauce, but maybe a little bit of the vision.
Yeah, I think one thing that inspired me, chatting with, for example, the founder of Atmos lately, that he can literally land his capsules anywhere in the world, and they have a tiny Cessna plane to just, fly to your facility. So my vision would really be to, have several labs around the world, and there's every couple of days, there's a plane coming with the stuff that came from space through that capsule, and our scientists are getting it and getting new samples, and then just building that product development pipeline. Just having a very high frequent launch cadence, having, if you look at manufacturing, just like everyone says, a large industrial park where we manufacture all the amazing products, all the microbes. We that we're not the survivors today in space, but we manufacture amazing compounds that improve the world in some way or the other. And just waking up every morning and having new samples from space would be the coolest thing ever. And I think it's super important for us that we don't focus on just a couple of people that go to space and, make their life easier. It's really about using space for the benefit of humanity and helping the 8 billion people on Earth with space, and not space for space sake.
Are there any, let's take a step out of Yuri for a second. Are there any technologies in space that you're excited about, that you're spending some time on, or you're just rooting for?
I was a huge nerd on Space Elevator for a while. So I read every kind of science fiction book and kind of also papers and really scientific articles on how space elevators could work. I think that would be a step change. And I love all the, I watched 4 rocket launches of Pharma Life, and just all amazing. It's all cool and we need rockets, but having a space elevator would be so game changing that I think this is one of the favorite technologies I wish to see in my lifetime.
All right. Well, maybe that's the next project.
Let's see.
Well, all right. Mark, this is a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Very exciting. Are there any? You mentioned you have a couple launches coming up. When is sort of your next launch, or anything that you've kind of released publicly so far in terms of kind of next milestone?
Yeah, as I said, so far everything we have done was on the ISS, and we had, I said, it was more than 150 space labs and everything. So for us, it's a really big milestone now, together with the partner Sierra Space, to have our first maiden launch of our science taxi, which will not be on the ISS, but will be in a different spacecraft, and showing the world and all the research community like around the world that are like 100% on the ISS today, showing that they have a new option to do their research, their commercial research, their manufacturing use cases. That gives me goosebumps as well. And that is scheduled for, in best case, Q1 next year. We all know in space, deadlines sometimes slip. So I'd rather say Q2 probably, but definitely should be not later than that.
Amazing. Well, we'll be watching. Mark, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.